we will find out where David lands. So, all right, well, thank you for coming. I'm quite certain this will be the best session at the entire camp because it's Saturday at 3:30. And also, Silicon Valley fans, anybody? Great show, great show. So, season finale episode, season one, season finale. Richard deletes his entire code base for TechCrunch Disrupt, rewrites it overnight, and wins TechCrunch Disrupt. At about 5 p.m. yesterday, I've been working on this for a few weeks, I have an outline, and I've been using Prezi. Has anyone used Prezi?
Yeah.
If you haven't, I can promise you that Prezi is the devil. It's made in Adobe Flash, and at about 5 yesterday, as I kept adjusting things, and my slides got more complicated, things just kept blowing up on me. At 5 o'clock yesterday, after this camp, I deleted my entire presentation and stayed up late last night hand coding in HTML using a JavaScript framework called Reveal. So it's bound to be spectacular. Okay, so first of all, a bit about me. My name is Tim Broeker. I am the technical director and a founder at Electric Citizen. We are a full-service Drupal shop here in Minneapolis, plan, design, develop, and support, full cycle. Our focus is largely on the civic sector with a lot of clients, including the U of M. They're one of our bigger clients right now, working with Carlson School, Law School, and numerous other departments. City of Bloomington, St. Paul, American Swedish Institute, Century College, so sort of in that sector, which will sort of inform, I think, a lot of my perspective on Drupal and WordPress and CMSs and sort of how it fits into that ecosphere. I've personally been building websites since 1994, and if you ever want to reach me, I'm at tim@electriccitizen.com. Okay, so before we start talking about Drupal versus WordPress, I wanted to give a hopefully very brief overview of how we got here. Why are we even having this discussion of Drupal versus WordPress? So I'm going to do this in 3 chunks of 10 years, going back to 1986. In 1986, there was email, Usenet, FTP, and a bunch of other weird protocols that no one remembers. There was no web, there was no Gopher, no AL, there was no such thing as dial-up. There was, of course, an internet, but none of the things that we would recognize it as today. In 1986, there were about 10,000 registered hosts, so things were still pretty early. Also in 1986, there were quite a few aimless youth. The Reagan Revolution, I was one of them. I was going into my senior year of high school in 1986. And at that time, actually, my father sat me down for a very serious talk and said, all my friends had picked their colleges and in many cases been accepted, so my father sat me down and said, you have 3 choices for your life. Military. This did not sound like a great option for me. Full-time job. I was a pizza driver at the time. This did not sound like a great option. College. Probably a pretty good option, but I did not take it. Instead, I found a 4th option, which was to spend the next 3 years hitchhiking and traveling around the country, much to my father's disappointment. Nonetheless, that brings us to 1991, which is when I came back. And in fact, right here at the University of Minnesota, I came back about 3 years later and enrolled, I think it was winter quarter, into the School of Continuing Education, and then the following spring entered school. But a lot of other things happened in 1991. Gopher. Anyone know Gopher? Remember Gopher? 2 hands, maybe? So Gopher was invented right here at the University of Minnesota in 1991. It was the first sort of way to make a human-friendly way to interact with the internet. It was a series of folders, and you had to navigate down. People started building search engines around it. It was simultaneously great and horrible. The World Wide Web was technically invented in 1991 at CERN by Tim Berners-Lee. There was no graphical browser. He was using a text-based browser at that point. And things were really going crazy. So my timing in terms of abandoning college for 3 years turned out to be quite fortuitous for me in that I entered college right when all this was happening. And now, as you can see, the amount of networked hosts are growing exponentially. Things are really starting to go crazy. However, at that point, we still had no CMSs, no internet, no nothing, or no web, I should say. 3 years later, I'm still at the U of M. This is a huge year. Netscape Navigator was released. That's the sort of the follow-up to Mosaic, which was late '93, I believe. The first graphical web browser, the first way for normal people, including me sitting in college, to point and click at things. And it really sort of, in my opinion, sort of changed the world in terms of what was happening with the internet at that time. It really got a lot of people interested in it and using it. So at that time, of course, people started building more websites. In the very beginning, in the early 90s, including myself, it was HTML, and then things like Front Page started showing up, and Hot Dog, and a whole series of horrible WYSIWYG editors that were designed to help people build these crazy, cool, new things on the internet. Simultaneously, programmers, started getting more into this and playing with Perl and CGI. In fact, in 1994, I was here at the U, like I said, working at the newspaper, the Minnesota Daily, and I was a political editor. And this was late '94, and I remember seeing in the paper, for up-to-date election results, see www.something. I had never seen this before. I had no idea what it was. I walked up to our tech people. So how do I see live election results? That would be great as a reporter. So they brought me to a copy of Mosaic and pulled up that website, and it was spectacular. And I've pretty much been doing what I do ever since. But as a result of that, starting in late '94 and launching in '95 was the Minnesota Daily. It was the third newspaper in the country to publish the full contents of their newspaper online every single day. Not, at the time people were posting excerpts or some of their articles. There was a group of programmers at the Daily that wrote a Perl script called the Cooker that took all the content from Quark and spit it out into the paper. I guess today we would call that a static site generator. It was great, but also horrible in that, if a reporter, say, wanted to add a link to his article, or, hey, here's my email address if you want to ask me a question, it was impossible because this content was coming out of Quark and there was then no way to go in and access it. Shortly after, perhaps even more so than Netscape Navigator, in the years 95 and 96, an interesting thing happened. In that 2-year span, Cold Fusion, these are all server-side languages, by the way, that's what allows web servers to talk to databases and other things. Cold Fusion, PHP, active server pages, all in a 2-year span appeared out of nowhere. Before it was sort of this hazy mixture of old languages, but these 3 languages were sort of designed directly to talk to databases. And so very quickly around this time, people started to get this idea of what we then called, it wasn't content management systems, it's database-driven websites. And we would go talk to people about, hey, you can put your content in a database, and we can use, in my case, I started using active server pages very early, and we can display it on a web page, and it was great and spectacular, and very clearly the way forward. Leading us up to what I have called the gold rush from 1996 to 2006. After that 94 year, things really started to take off in terms of browsers, hosts, websites, you name it. This was incorporated the years of the .com boom and bust. Right around 96, I started working outside of the U for clients and started thinking, hey, maybe I could do this as a business. And in 96, again, there really wasn't a notion of a content management system, but people were programming their own, using PHP and Cold Fusion and ASP to basically build their own, which we did many times and everybody else did. Very quickly after that, it became clear that there should be this thing, which eventually was called the content management system. And between the years of 96 and 2006, there was this huge explosion of commercial CMSs, the big ones, Vignette, Interwoven, Broadvision. I remember working for clients in, I guess it must have been about 98, and I think it was the story server guys came in just to get the software license, $250,000. The software license on itself was meaningless because in order to use the software license, they would bring in a team of 3 to 4 consultants at another $250,000 a year to spend the year building, training, then they would disappear. Nonetheless, there were all these companies building very, very expensive, very powerful, what we now call enterprise CMSs, small software shops. Many got the idea that, hey, we can do this. We're going to build our own CMS. Very quickly after that, because of PHP at the time was already open source, there was Linux was growing huge in the server market. Very quickly, open source developers started building these tools, and through this whole time, again, I go back to the gold rush thing where we just had gazillions of options sort of appear magically in this 10-year period, which led us to, the end of 2006, basically this, and we're missing several, but there were, it was almost impossible to choose, Clone, Typo3, Zoops, E107, as people use these. I've used almost all of these at one point or another in my career. Mambo, and then that grew into Joomla. We had WordPress and Drupal. So there was just this sort of buffet of choices. And, 5 years earlier, there was no such thing, and suddenly they are everywhere. 10 years, the following 10-year period, 2006 to 2016, we've got all these crazy options. I call this period the settling, in that since that time, I feel like things have kind of settled down a little bit. We know what content management is. We know largely how it works. The options, in some ways, have narrowed. I say open source grows up, post-nuke. If you remember PHP nuke, it was one of the very first PHP-based systems, and then there was a post-nuke, and I believe there was a post-nuke. People trying to make these tools better, that they were working, but very clearly not perfect. Drupal 5 shows up in 2007. This is my first exposure to Drupal was Drupal 5, and at that point, having used all these other tools I just looked at, suddenly Drupal started looking like a very attractive option. About a year later, Joomla 1.5, followed by WordPress 2.1, Drupal 6, unlike our current release cycle, came out, if you remember, almost 1 year to the date after Drupal 5. So in all these cases, things are improving, the tools are getting better, the way people use them are sort of standardizing a little bit, and things, in my opinion, are sort of settling down all the way up through 2016. Until we get to this point where we now have basically it's a commodity market. There are these stats, by the way, I think I'll try to get them on my slide, but I think it was CMSware where I just went through and used their directory. In theory, they're supposed to be actively maintained, meaning these are real systems. They are tracking 64 active open source projects, including, of course, Drupal and WordPress, over 126 commercial CMS options, and 83 SaaS options, software as a service, meaning you're paying a monthly fee to have them do this service for you. So that sort of brings us up to where we are now and sort of how we got here. But the reality is, even with that endless buffet of choice, this is today's current market share of CMS, WordPress. And you can find 6 or 7 sites that do these stats, and they're all slightly different, but almost every graph you look at will generally look like this. WordPress has about half the market. This is the top 1 million sites on the web. There's a number of other metrics people use, but I chose this one. Drupal, down here at 6.5%. Joomla, a lot of the other services have Joomla up even higher, in some cases twice as many Drupal sites. And then a couple of small projects that have less than 1%, and then this giant other, which is everything else. Custom solutions, other commercial solutions that don't make this list. So, in some ways, that's what's informing what we're about to talk about, which is Drupal versus WordPress. The market really, again, sort of settled down a little bit, and a large chunk of the market decided A, open source, B, WordPress, and in some cases, Drupal and Joomla, and a few other things.
So you think Joomla is still 7%?
Like I said, that one was low. I saw other slides where they had Drupal or Joomla at 12, 13%, and Drupal at 7%. And I'm sure it's different depending on the metrics they're using, but most of the statistics will say that Joomla has a higher user share than Drupal, which is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, that's for the top 1 million sites. I'm sure that chart looks drastically different if you were to filter the top 10,000 sites, right?
Yeah, but I'd be more interested in seeing all, let me see the whole web, because not every person, we were, again, in the civic sector, their goal is not to be in the top 1 million websites, right? Their goal is to have an effective presence on the web. Sturgeon's Law, has anyone heard of this? Theodore Sturgeon was a science fiction writer in the 50s, and in response to critics who were saying, almost all science fiction is bad, it's terrible. Sturgeon came up with this law that says 90% of everything is crap. So why, what? Who cares? That is the law. And so now this is sort of a popular culture meme, and it's shown up in numerous other places, but that's where it came from. So if that's true, 90% of these options and all the other ones that I just talked about are crap, right? And having used many of these, I can personally attest to the fact that that is very likely true. And in fact, I have a corollary to Sturgeon's law, and I call it Broeker's law. That's my last name. And I've been formulating this law over many years of meeting with clients and building websites for clients, and that's that all content management systems are some degree of pure evil. All of them. Every last one. Drupal, WordPress, you name it. They're evil. How many people, I'm guessing with such a small crowd of Drupal people, how many people actually work with Drupal as a content editor, adding content to a website versus building it for someone? So a couple people. It's terrible. And it's not just Drupal, it's everything. They're slow, they're cumbersome, especially when you're logged in as an admin user. Bugs, we do a lot of support and maintenance. I can't think of every single piece of software and every single website is going to have horrible bugs at times that are frustrating and irritating. They can be outrageously expensive. Even though CMSs are a commodity, actually getting something built for your organization that works can be outrageous in terms of cost. They go out of date quickly. Dan gave a session earlier about how long does a website last, and the answer is not that long. You just spent $50,000 on this large project, and 2 years later, the entire landscape has shifted, and maybe something has happened in mobile, or you name it. A lot of times you lose your work. At least once a month we get an email from a client like, "Oh, I was working on this form and I pressed save and it's gone, and I was doing it for an hour. Can you get it back?" And the answer is no. I'm sorry, we can't. Your form died on you. Your stupid video keeps breaking, all right? How many people have used media through the entire life cycle of Drupal 7? It's better now than it used to be. Every time you upgrade media, your WYSIWYG suddenly breaks or something breaks, and we get support tickets about this. And it's just utterly horrible. They're evil. So that's sort of my feeling on CMSs, and yet they're not going away. In fact, they're probably becoming more and more critical to organizations of all sizes. So, like I said, I think it was about 96, 98 when I really started getting into the commercial realm and working for clients, and I spent a good 10 years trying different CMSs and writing my own CMSs. I've written at least 3 full-scale CMSs on my own. My goal as a business owner and as someone who works with clients has always been, how can we take these powerful tools and get them in the hands of a small nonprofit or a government agency and allow them to use them? And back in the day, I would add to that by saying without having to go spend $2.5 million on Vignette Story Server and a team of consultants. And so, again, I built several custom CMSs. I worked in Taco 3 for a while. We used early WordPress. I was heavily involved in Mambo and Joomla. We went through Drupal and Easy Publish and Zoots and you name it. Sort of this long search for. And by the way, it wasn't as if we were jumping from client to client with different solutions. It was always like, we need to find a unified solution that we can do over and over again for all these clients. Drupal 5. And so, as someone who did this, I tracked this market, and when new releases would come out, I would try them, and I had always sort of kept my eye on Drupal. But if anyone used Drupal 4, it was not exactly the type of software that you could easily hand to a non-technical client and say, here you go, manage your site. It was virtually impossible. Drupal 5 started to change that in 2007, and I really started to think seriously about it. Drupal 6 comes out a year later, and like a lot of people, it just sort of knocked my socks off and blew me out of the water in terms of, for the first time, I could picture walking into a client's office, pulling up a Drupal admin screen on a site and say, here it is, I'm going to train you how to use this, and it looks nice, and it works. And it was, to me, a huge win. And pretty much since that date, our search has been over. I now work with Electric Citizen, we've grown, and we have employees, and we have lots of clients, and it's been Drupal. The old saying about the hammer and the nail. Just sort of, it was perfect for us, and it has been for many years. Until about 6 months ago, we get a call from a client It says very simply, why can't we use WordPress? It's so much easier to use. And as I said in my session description, that's normally very easy, but I'm going to just give you some quick background on this client. So, longtime client, been with us for many years, high-profile client. They do radio ads, magazine ads. Generally, as far as we knew, I've been very, very happy with the Drupal site, happy with our work. We have a long-term support and maintenance contract with them. Everything's good. Their site's aging a little bit, though, so we've been meeting with them and coming up with a proposal to do a pretty significant redesign, a refresh, some content changes, sort of bringing their site more into the modern age. It's going well. They've accepted our proposal. Everyone's on board. And then they hire a new communications director right in the middle of this process who, she wants to meet us because she's in charge of this project. And I think Carrie had her on the phone and said, why can't we use WordPress? Right? Simple question. Because she had bad, horrible experiences with Drupal. And one of the funny parts of this is that she came directly from one of my old clients. In fact, a current client. I built the Drupal site that she had such horrible experiences with 7 years ago. A Drupal 6 site that had been sitting there for 7 years. It was a hugely complex site that should never have been done in Drupal 7. It was a site for a series of theaters here in town that had just a bizarre need for, they manage events, right? So they have events. Great. But they have series of events, meaning this event can go multiple times over multiple days. On each day, it can have multiple performance times. On each performance, it could have an ASL component, it could have, you name it, all these different weird requirements. And so we built this horribly complex beast for them to use that then sat there for 7 years with her using it and hating it, especially as it aged and things got better. She, at the same time, had great experiences with WordPress. They had a blog on WordPress, and she was like, it's so easy. I don't understand why, if we're going to go through this huge refresh, why can't we just use WordPress? Fair question. So it ended sort of with her saying, look, can you just send a document, I think we tried to explain briefly, can you just send a document that outlines this in human terms? Okay, I've done this dozens of times. This is a question I can answer in my sleep, right? So this has been the conventional wisdom for many years about Drupal versus WordPress. And if you've ever even thought about this, you know these. WordPress is good for blogs and simple sites. It's perfect. It started out as a blogging engine. It evolved into a CMS that is pretty good at putting together simple sites. Great solution for it. Drupal, however, is great for anything large and complex, enterprise-y. It's more powerful, right? WordPress is a pleasure to use. It's easy. Everyone knows that, right? They've sort of started that trend of, hey, this is really easy to use. Drupal, quite a bit harder and more complicated to use and learn, but hey, it's worth it because it has so much more power, so much more complexity you can have. Google it. So if you do Google this, and I did Google this, and we'll go into that more later, you will find thousands and thousands of articles saying this exact same thing in one form or another. So we think, okay, we'll write this up just like we always have, because this has always been sort of our answer. It turns out all of that I just showed is completely and utterly wrong. Virtually every remaining article on the web about Drupal versus Joomla is wholly inaccurate throughout the web. The best you'll find are in comments where people are saying, really? You're living in a bubble if you think this is still true. So there is some good discussion about it, but there are still, to this day, hundreds, thousands of articles about this topic reiterating those same sort of truths that I just showed. None of it is true.
It's more a religious argument, right?
I'm sorry?
It's more a religious argument where the person...
Right, well, I think too, it's self-reinforcing. A lot of people a lot of that used to be kind of true, right? And people believe it's true, and then you start telling clients, like I did for many years, like, hey, WordPress is great, but Drupal's better. You start to believe it, and people write blog articles based on other blog articles. So I, pretty quickly thought, okay, I'll put together a document, and I started this chart. And I started thinking, okay, she wants, at this point, it's pretty clear that a lot of the conventional wisdom is wrong. As a, hopefully intelligent software developer and business owner, I thought, it's my duty to do my due diligence here and give her a real answer. Why is Drupal better? Right? So I started making this chart. and I start Googling, and I'm going to show you the rest of this chart. You'll see it's empty down here because I got to the second one and I started going through each one of these and saying, hey, do you need to migrate content? Do you have a lot of business rules or custom processes? Thinking this is going to be dead easy, I'll be able to say, well, if you do, you want Drupal. I very quickly realized that I was selling lies, right? I mean, I could have gone down this whole column and made up things, but the truth is, I gave up. Then we, as a team, started going into, okay, we can't explain it in a chart. Let's come up with a really effective analogy in human-friendly terms that's going to explain this to her, right? So none of these worked. The first one, this one I came up with, was comparing and writing a very eloquent sort of narrative about these two cameras. On the left is the Canon EOS 70D. It's a professional-grade camera built exclusively for sports photographers. It'll stand up in sleet, snow, rain, 100-degree weather, sand, dropping. It's made for a certain job. Costs, I think, about $3,000 to $5,000. On the right is a sub-$1,000 Canon EOS 1D. My point was, no one in this room probably could look at a photo from either of those cameras and be able to tell the difference in image quality. You can't look at the bodies of those cameras and tell much of a difference. You just sort of know, as a sports photographer, like my life, my enterprise, depends on having this photographer, this camera to do my job. I'm of course going to choose the industrial camera that's built for this purpose. This sort of worked, but it really became, I guess you would say, telling, sort of showing like, hey, it's these cameras, but really no. It's like, oh, why would she believe me? Then Dan came up with this analogy, my business partner Dan up there, about baking. WordPress is more like a cake mix. You buy this thing and it has these plugins that are already built. Wouldn't you rather build your own gourmet meal out of specific ingredients like entity fields and references and have exactly what you want, and it's going to end up a gourmet meal? Again, I think we all agreed that both of these were utter failures. The Lego analogy, this one I use and come back to again and again and again, thinking, the idea was that here's Drupal, a box of Legos, and you can build whatever you want out of it. And the corollary was here's WordPress. When I was a kid, this is what you got. Now with Legos, you get little kits, and you build exact little things, and you don't get this big box of random pieces. And so I was trying to come up with an analogy between Legos and Lego kits for Drupal and WordPress. Modified cars, it started to get ridiculous as we come up with ideas. If you want a Ferrari, buy a Ferrari. Don't buy some piece of junk and put a giant crazy engine in it. Again, we're telling but not really showing why this might be true. I went so far as to try to rewrite. Has anyone ever read In the Beginning there was the Command Line by Neil Stephenson? If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a 60-page essay on the difference written in the early 90s between Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. And he comes up with this great analogy of each one is a car dealership. And the Linux, the Mac dealership is this fancy car lot selling high-end, beautiful cars, and they're super expensive. Windows is sort of a Chevy dealer selling commodity cars, and they're great and they're cheap. Go ahead and buy it. Linux has a tank dealership across the corner. Your tank is free. It's a great analogy. In any case, I tried to rewrite a fictional account of In the Beginning there was a command line using that same thing. Again, fail. So at this point, I'm really, I wouldn't say panicking, but I'm really like, okay, really what are we looking at here? Drupal's key competitive advantages. How can we come back to this client and explain this to her? Custom content types. They are now on WordPress core and have been, I think, since version 3. I don't know. Oh, I forgot to ask. How many people in here are WordPress people? Anybody? 1, sort of. 2. Okay, I was just curious if we had any actual WordPress developers here. So that I can say anything I want almost. So custom content types, WordPress core, it's in core, right? This for a long time was one of Drupal's key things that everyone said, WordPress doesn't have content types. Now they do. Custom modules and hooks, people have always said, Drupal is so flexible, you can write a hook or a module to do anything. Guess what? WordPress has custom hooks and modules that are written using those hooks. So now I'm starting to get a little worried, and I start digging deeper. Custom fields. Again, huge competitive advantage for Drupal. Not only do we have content types, but we can add fields to these content types, link fields and image fields and text fields, and you name it. Very powerful date fields, custom fields. WordPress has advanced custom fields. 1+ million installs, actively updated. If you were to read this whole description, it basically is Drupal's custom fields. Very popular module. Okay, let's go further. Views. Probably the #1 most cited competitive advantage for Drupal. We always are able to say, hey, with Drupal it's very powerful. You can not only can you model your content any way you want with content types and fields, you can display it in views, and it's great and spectacular. WordPress views. Display WordPress content without programming. This is Drupal views. You pay $149 for it, but nonetheless, we now have views in WordPress.
Have you used that views?
We'll get there. So now I'm panicking even more, and I'm starting to get into the sort of the woods a little bit, right? Like surely there's no good entity reference solution. Bidirectional post-relational field. And this is one, by the way, all of these are one of dozens usually of these things, okay? So they have entity references. Now at this point, I'm getting a little more worried about how I'm going to continue to sell Drupal. Field collections. Always a pain point in Drupal, now pretty stable. Just custom fields. Fields collections, and this also shows up in numerous other field-based WordPress plugins. Okay, so at this point, I'm starting to feel even worse about myself and Drupal. Panels. We're a big panel shop, right? We do everything in panels. All that may be changing a little bit, but nonetheless, we're big fans of panels. Another sort of, okay, if it has a list, it surely can't have panels. Page Builder by Site Origin. Build responsive page layouts using the widgets you know and love with this simple drag and drop page builder. Drupal Panels IPE does the same thing. Okay, workflow, that was on my chart, but my empty chart where it says, hey, do you have complex workflow needs? You need Drupal. No, you do not. You have Oasis Workflow, which is basically Workbench and Workbench Access. Automate your WordPress editorial workflow, drag and drop, simple.
You're depressing me.
Yes, believe me. So, keep going. Name any competitive advantage for Drupal, and WordPress will probably do it. And if you don't think it will, go to a WordCamp after party and meet some WordPress developer. He or she will tell you you're wrong, and you can probably do it. It's just a fact.
They're not quite as good on accessibility.
Okay,
They're working
yep.
on it,
Nope.
but they're not quite as far as.
And I actually don't specifically address accessibility, but thank you for that point. I may add it to this later. So that was pretty bad. It gets, we go to a 4:30, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It gets worse. So it can do all these things that Drupal can do. It's also got a 50% market share. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's using it.
What about security wise?
So I don't actually have a slide for that, but that is now basically, historically, yes, WordPress plugins in particular would get hacked all the time, but in 2016, it's much, much less of a problem. As you'll see later, I sort of infiltrated the WordPress community and started going through forums and reading about these exact problems, and WordPress, the team at Automatic, has tried to solve that by doing more rigorous security reviews and so on, but I don't have a slide, but again, one of those things where it's pretty close these days. My guess is Drupal's security team is head and shoulders above, but it would be probably a hard argument to make. So not only can it do everything that Drupal can do, it has a higher market share, 50%. Again, it sets the standard for the ease of use. This is how this whole conversation started. It's so much easier to use. Just people have always said that. In fact, just yesterday someone said that to me. Increasingly, and it has been this way for a long time, WordPress powers high-profile, high-traffic websites. Right in the middle of all this, I was, as I'm trying to justify Drupal, go to the Pioneer Press, the St. Paul paper, and I see in the bottom corner, powered by WordPress. It's like, okay, so now the Pioneer Press is running WordPress, one of our big local newspapers, and millions of other, in that top million and probably the top 10,000 sites are run by WordPress. There's more freelancers and designers out there who are also cheaper, just on job boards and local communities and so on. It's easier to find a WordPress person, it just is. And frankly, it's cheaper to build. As a Drupal shop, we frequently maybe bid against WordPress companies who are coming in significantly lower than us for a variety of reasons that we'll probably get to shortly here. But it is. It's just a known fact that it's generally cheaper to build out a WordPress site than a Drupal site. Existential crisis. An existential crisis, this is the dictionary definition, is a moment at which an individual questions the very foundations of their life, whether this life has any meaning, purpose, or value. That is literally how I felt at the end of this. Like I said, I've been a business owner for a long time now, and my goal has always been to do right by our clients, right? There's no benefit of me selling someone snake oil or a piece of crap CMS, so it's always been this long journey of mine to do right by my clients, and suddenly I'm thinking maybe we're not. Should we be developing WordPress sites? I don't know at this point. I really don't know, and should we go to this client and develop a WordPress site? So for me, a big part of what I do is sales and convincing people to give us money to give them a website. And the only way, I'm not a salesman, the only way I've ever been able to do that is to believe in what I'm selling. And suddenly, there was this, fairly painful moment in time where I truly didn't know if I believed in what we were selling anymore in terms of Drupal. And so how are we going to move forward? I and our team sort of thought, okay, we need to figure this out. I personally need to get to the bottom of this and figure out why we're still selling Drupal. So let's go WordPressing. So the first thing I did was really try to get a picture of the contrib market. Just like Drupal, of course with Drupal 8 this is becoming less and less, but WordPress is nothing without contrib. It's a content types and a few things. All the stuff I just showed you was contrib, so I thought, okay, that's a good place to start. It's a commercial market, unlike Drupal, with 45,000 plugins, both free and commercial. A very low barrier to entry. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to push a module up to Drupal.org, but it's pretty painful in terms of code review and time and making sure that you're not duplicating someone's effort. And people complain about how hard it is to get a module up on Drupal.org. Not the case here. Very simple documentation on how to write a simple Word plugin and a very simple process for getting it up there. Again, I said I sort of spent some time on WordPress forums. A common theme is upgrade issues because of this. Plugins will get abandoned very frequently, in that someone will put up an easy plugin and it'll get a few thousand installs, and then that developer will leave college, for instance, and it stays up in the directory. So that was just sort of an overview. More pointedly, in almost every category, there's what I call a bazaar of options. There are 182 separate event and calendar plugins, 143 plugins to build forms. We have web form and now entity form. There are 518 plugins to manage photo galleries of various kinds, 42 plugins to manage fields and content types, 476 commerce or store related plugins. We have commerce and maybe a few other smaller options. So is that good or bad? Is choice a good thing? So a lot of people in the WordPress world would say it's great. I have 400 commerce options to choose from, or 37 event options to choose from, which can be a great thing under certain cases. However, it has what I call the Joomla problem, which is that there are so many options, but none of them are exactly right. And I know this because I spent many years developing in Joomla, which has a similar market of contrib modules and a similar situation in that there are 25 event modules to choose from. They're all solving for X. In other words, what often happens is someone will have a client and they'll say, hey, we need to manage our events, and they'll write a plugin and they'll say, hey, we could reuse this, and they'll sell it. But that's solving for X, for that one particular client problem. Often you would say, hey, that calendar is great, but could I get this private messaging feature from this other calendar that works there? And the answer is no, because they are separate. Often this results in people, it's very easy to quickly fork a module to say, hey, I'll just grab that code from this module and put it in here, and suddenly I have my solution. But that leads to upgrade issues or missing functionality, which neither of those are good. It gets worse still in the WordPress plugin field. I got to hurry up here. So I'm going to quickly go back to this idea of 42 separate plugins to manage content types, right? We have Drupal in Drupal 8 now. Both core content types and fields are in core. No contrib modules, and even before that, it was one thing, right? That old timers might remember. Was it called FlexiNode? Anyone? FlexiNode? Yeah. And so then that quickly turned into Earl's work on CCK and all the field work. This was a moment of clarity for me in that I found this chart. It's a comparison chart of all 42 of these plugins. This is mind-boggling to me that there are 42 separate options to manage something as critical to your website as your fields and your content types. If you look into this, contributor team size, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. This chart, by the way, continues way over this way and way down this way. It is absurd to me. So this was really when I first started thinking, maybe all is not right here. And I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna get back to this. But my point being, it was a moment of clarity and absurdity. Because, so breaking bad, when plugins go bad, two of the plugins that I just showed on that chart, one of them I showed earlier is Advanced Custom Fields Pro. This is a blog post. I'm obviously not going to have you read it, but this was a couple years ago. This has happened twice now. So again, million users, million plus sites are relying on this module. It was free. Twice in the past 2 years, they have completely changed their APIs and broken sites. If you wanted to move from 3 to 4, I think it was, your site's going to break because we now have a different API for fields. Horrible. Then they did it again. Then very recently, they changed their licensing and said, okay, now it's version, you used to have to pay for little plugins. We're going to go to version 4, I think it is, and we're going to give you all the plugins, but you have to pay for it, and guess what? Our API is changing again. Now, if you are managing a large, significant website, I would imagine that is a problem for you. This one's even worse. This one is also on the chart. I'm going to highlight down here. So this was not quite as big, but it had 10,000 active installs, been around for 3 years, active updates. It had a high 4.8 out of 5 on the rating scale. Anyone looking at that chart very likely may have picked this. Out of those 40 options, how do you pick? A lot of people pick, of course, advanced content fields, but you may easily have ended up with this one. And it turns out, on a given day, certain sysadmins started noticing this weird file on their websites called, I think it was auto-upload-something.php, auto-update.php. As it turns out, the guy who had been running this for 3 years got bored with it and sold it to somebody who immediately put in a backdoor to this plugin powering 10,000 sites that was able to upload and basically take over the web server and push up PHP files. So, again, I want to leave a little time here. So, okay, in my opinion, that's a big problem with that contrib market in terms of all those choices and the ability for things to go bad. Another big issue, in my opinion, with WordPress are shortcodes. That's what this WP Gmax is. They're very prominent in WordPress. Used in a lot of places where in Drupal we might use something like paragraphs or fieldable panel panes, and in my opinion they are sort of a horrible UI. They used to be very prominent in Drupal. We still use them a little bit, like we have a little TOC shortcode. But in WordPress there's all these modules that do WordPress shortcodes, and they have you do things like this. And what I'm getting at here is this idea of ease of use. Like everyone says WordPress is so easy, but the reality is when you start to do certain things, you start having to enter content like this, and it becomes a horrible user experience. More shortcodes. A lot of people are starting to do these things like, hey, I want boxes in a grid, or accordions, or jQuery tabs, or buttons. There's all these modules out in the WordPress world that are doing this for people. I'm going to zoom through this, but this is a very prominent WordPress developer who hates shortcodes. Many pages of text. We get to the bottom of his article, and he says, there is no, they're horrible, but there is no solution in WordPress. There just isn't. And if you were to read the comments, there still isn't, to my knowledge. And I would. So, shortcode problem. A third problem can be integration. I found a lot of cases in the WordPress world. Here's one example where contrib modules don't play nice together. This poor guy has a classified ad plugin, of which, again, there are dozens and dozens of options, and he has a private messaging plugin. In the ads plugin, there's a, hey, contact this person button. He wants it to work with his private messaging module. In the WordPress world, that can be very, very difficult to do without hacking or forking the module. Long story short, that whole sort of little journey that I just went on through all those things got me really thinking that maybe this is our beautiful house in terms of what we have with Drupal and sort of where Drupal has landed in comparison to that WordPress ecosphere that we just went over. So, and why? So Drupal historically has done an amazing job not just solving for X, but solving for X, Y, and Z. We have the fields module. Many people have worked together to define, hey, what is a field? There's a link field, an email field, a text field. How should fields work? The Drupal community has decided, here's how fields work. We don't have 87 different single developers deciding how fields are going to work. We decided as a community, this is how fields work and dates work, and here's how we flag content, and here's how we have references. Everything, especially in Drupal 8, is in core now. All those things that we talked about. Why should I have to choose between all these field modules when I get the collective effort of hundreds of people deciding it for me so that it will work for everybody? Quick stat, in Drupal 7 there, and of course this I'm sure it will grow, but there are actually only 12,000 active modules for Drupal 7, even though there's something like 45,000 total. And for Drupal 8 right now, there's only 2,000. And my hunch is that that number is going to stay pretty darn low in that we don't have a lot of need for these solve for X modules anymore because we have so much that solves for X, Y, and Z right in core. Everything works with everything, right? In Drupal, you expect that if you have a calendar that it's going to work with your private messaging and it's going to work with views and it's going to work with the flag module. You'd be hard-pressed to release a successful Drupal module these days that doesn't work with views. You'd be dead. Special snowflakes. Drupal makes it, because of all that, makes it very easy to handle custom, things that aren't X, Y, or Z. Maybe we've got I don't have time to give my full analogy, but we worked with the law school on their directories, and it turned into this horribly complex system of certain professors in some lists that had to have this rule here, and this email could only show up when they were in this list, and this email had to be hidden when they were in this list. Very complex, but Drupal makes that kind of thing quite easy because of all of the above. Custom applications, same thing. The amount of code it takes to write something complex and custom in WordPress is significantly higher than doing a similar task in Drupal. And of course, again, going back to our client base, almost everyone has some sort of custom application they need, whether it's a job bank or a code library or you name it, where there isn't some module in Drupal contrib or in WordPress contrib to do this. Someone's got to go build it, and Drupal has the tools to do that in a much better way than WordPress. Paragraphs. We've started using paragraphs heavily. If you haven't used it, it's a spectacular module that allows content editors to very easily drop in things like some of those shortcodes we saw, a map, jQuery tabs, whatever, table, very powerful, a video, images, columns, very powerful, and I would make the argument, and I believe it, that in that regard, Drupal is actually much easier to use than WordPress in that we're providing tools to our users that are managing their content in a very modular, reusable way versus having to type in these horrible shortcodes. And finally, no one's going to sell you out. I'm pretty sure that Earl Miles will not return from the dead and sell views to someone who will put in a backdoor or panels or something else, right? I mean, it would be impossible in the Drupal world for that to happen. So, slowly now, I'm thinking our crisis has been averted in that, for our clients in the civic sector, their digital presence is more critical than it ever has been. People talk about enterprise software and how, Drupal 8 is too much for the enterprise. Well, guess what? Your organization, if you're a nonprofit or a museum or a theater, is your enterprise, and enterprise does not necessarily have to mean IBM or Apple. It's not a bad word, and software that can solve problems like building a custom job bank can be a good thing. And organizations are only going to expect more of this, better third-party integrations, better custom tools, continuous improvement, stability, longevity, and finally, for those reasons, you don't necessarily want to end up with a $20,000 WordPress site with 16 random plugins. If your web presence is critical to your organization, you might want to spend some money and some effort on it. A lot of these organizations that we work with will have no problem dropping $20,000 on a radio spot or $60,000 on a full-page magazine ad or you name it, but when it comes to their website, we can do WordPress for $10,000. My argument is that it's not necessarily bad to spend some time and effort on your website. And so the bottom line for me, and here we are, is that Drupal still is the right answer in a lot of use cases. Real quickly, I'll just run through my epilogue. So when is Drupal not the answer? The infamous single-page redirect. About a year ago, we had a support desk at Freshdesk that had support.freshdesk.com, and we wanted to redirect support.electriccitizen to Freshdesk. And something was going on with our domain registrar, and we had just sent out an email blast directing all our clients to this new support link. It wasn't working, and I thought, aha, I will set up a Drupal site and have a single page, a panel page with a 301 redirect pointing them there. That site lived for a year and a half for no other purpose than to redirect people, a ridiculous use case for Drupal or anything like it. Clients without a long-term commitment or budget for support and maintenance. I think it's a crime against humanity to hand a expensive Drupal site to a small nonprofit or a small group and say, here you go. They're dead in the water at that point, and they don't deserve and shouldn't have Drupal. And people like me should not sell them Drupal. Same thing with expertise or internal resources. If you are a small shop and you have no technical people and no money to hire people, you probably don't want a Drupal site. No need for it. There are plenty of clients that have simple use cases that are, frankly, content, and it's not critical. If you launch a 5-page mini site or something and your content type plugin gets hijacked, not a big deal. It's not critical to your enterprise. It's a neater, smaller use case. When is WordPress the right answer? You already know and like WordPress. A lot of people love it. It obviously has half the market share. Maybe you have internal staff. I'm not here to tell you that WordPress is horrible. I think WordPress is great. I got very into almost building WordPress sites. I think it's great, and if you already know it, it's a perfect use case. When what you have is already good enough. Again, sort of going back to this idea that maybe this is pretty simple and we don't need a job bank and we don't need this. We just need 10 pages. Perfect. You want to be the next Rolling Stone magazine or publishing. It continues to be a much better platform, in my opinion, than Drupal for high-scale content publishing. Your job is content. You're pushing out articles, videos, getting comments, blogs. WordPress continues. Not that Drupal can't do that, but if that was my goal in life, was to start a top million publishing website, I would probably be choosing WordPress. Simple needs or a small budget. WordPress can be a perfect answer for that. And finally, Squarespace or other options. What about them? They can be great. In fact, since this whole journey started, I have personally pushed 2 old clients off of old Drupal 6 sites to Squarespace for all the reasons we just covered. They didn't have money, they didn't have staff, they couldn't pay for support, they couldn't pay for upgrades, their needs were fairly simple. Squarespace made a lot of sense for them. Software as a service. We frequently bid against companies who come in and say, hey, for $250 a month, you can have your own city site. Some of those are just horrible. We have found other options where, this is the right option for you because it's cheap, it does what you need it to do in the most case, and you don't need to spend a lot of money on a Drupal site. And then also there are static site builders and all sorts of new tools that we're not going to go into now, but God knows what the next 10 years are going to bring us. But right now, where we stand today, I am a very happy Drupaler, and will continue to be so. So thank you. We have exactly 5 minutes for questions, although I'm guessing most people are probably anxious to hit.
So I had the same conversation with current 5 bars. What happened with yours?
Yes, I never got to the epilogue of that. So we sent them in my opinion, very horrible, half-hearted document, doing our best to say, here's, really, but what it really came down to was, you have to trust us. We've been working with you for years. A lot of the stuff I just covered here was not human-friendly, and to sit down with someone who's not technical and explain why having 42 different ways to define fields is bad, that's a very difficult thing to do when someone doesn't understand that, or why shouldn't that be good?
Right.
And so, but we did end up staying with that client on Drupal, and they are very happy. So.
Nice.
So why do you position your company as a Drupal?
Why?
As a Drupal shop, and not somebody who will build a website that...
Right. So there's a couple answers to that. One is that for many years, people would come to us asking for Drupal sites over and over and over again. Once we had built a few of them, and we became known as, hey, Drupal guys, and all of you people in the Drupal community, and all the things I just talked about, and this whole effort for solving for X, Y, and Z. We are all working together to solve these common problems that a lot of people, everyone here, and every organization has. I find value in that. I find it easy to sell. I find it's something I believe in, and I can walk into any client office and comfortably know that I am not selling snake oil. And so I'm very proud to say we are a Drupal shop. All right. I hope you all. Oh, go ahead.
So if I can summarize how you kind of position against WordPress, it's a little bit of selling fear, right? Selling, boy, you don't know what's going to happen with that module. You don't know if that kid's going to graduate college and somebody's going to backfill.
It is a little bit, yeah. And to me, though, it's less selling fear and more selling. And I guess it's sort of they go hand in hand. But to me, Drupal is a very stable, comfortable place to be, where it's Drupal historically has just gotten better and better and better, and it's listened to the needs of the community, and it's found a place where it can do that, and people can come. It's sort of like in the old days. You won't get fired for buying IBM, and so that's sort of my feeling about Drupal. That if you are an organization whose web presence is critical, and it should be, to what you're doing, Twitter and this and that you want a software solution that is up to that task, and Drupal, in my opinion, is that software.
You know what? I want to say one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't know your company, I would bet that people don't come to you because you're a Drupal shop, because they have great experience, they rely on you, and you do what you say, and you're reliable. And
Yep, that is more and more the case, and in fact,
that is because that's my experience with the companies that I'm working with. They come to us or to me because I do what I say.
Right. Yeah, that is more and more the case, where we can no longer rely on, hey, we do Drupal, therefore you will hire me. Now it's more, we do good work, and we happen to use Drupal in most cases to do it. All right, I hope some or all of you come to the after party, and thank you.